cuneiform script is one of the earliest systems of writing, distinguished by its wedge-shaped marks on clay tablets, made by means of a blunt reed for a stylus. The name cuneiform itself simply means wedge-shaped, from the Latin cuneus, wedge, and forma, shape, and came into English usage probably from Old French cuneiform, emerging in Sumer in the late 4th millennium BCE. Cuneiform writing began as a system of pictographs. In the 3rd millennium, the pictorial representations became simplified and more abstract as the number of characters in use grew smaller, from about 1,000 in the early Bronze Age to about 400 in late Bronze Age. The system consists of a combination of logophonetic, consonantal, alphabetic and syllabic signs. The original Sumerian script was adapted for the writing of the Akkadian, Eblate, Elamite, Hittite, Luwian, Hattic, Hurrian, and Urartian languages, and it inspired the Ugaritic and Old Persian alphabets. Cuneiform writing was gradually replaced by the Phoenician alphabet during the Neo-Assyrian Empire. By the 2nd century CE, the script had become extinct, and all knowledge of how to read it was lost until it began to be deciphered in the 19th century. Between 500,000 and 2 million cuneiform tablets are estimated to have been excavated in modern times, of which only approximately 30,000–100,000 have been read or published. The British Museum holds the largest collection, 130,000, followed by the Vorderasiatisches Museum Berlin, the Louvre, the Istanbul Archaeology Museums, the National Museum of Iraq, the Yale Babylonian Collection and Penn Museum. Most of these have lain in these collections for a century without being translated, studied or published, as there are only a few hundred qualified cuneiformists in the world. History. The cuneiform writing system was in use for more than 3 millennia, through several stages of development, from the 34th century BCE, down to the 2nd century CE. Ultimately, it was completely replaced by alphabetic writing in the course of the Roman era, and there are no cuneiform systems in current use. It had to be deciphered as a completely unknown writing system in 19th century Assyriology. Successful completion of its deciphering is dated to 1857. Proto-Literate period. The cuneiform script was developed from pictographic proto-writing in the late 4th millennium BCE. Mesopotamia's Proto-Literate period spans roughly the 35th to 32nd centuries. The first documents unequivocally written in the Sumerian language date to c. the 31st century, found at Jemdet Nasser. Originally, pictographs were either drawn on clay tablets in vertical columns with a sharpened reed stylus, or incised in stone. This early style lacked the characteristic wedge shape of the strokes. Certain signs to indicate names of gods, countries, cities, vessels, birds, trees, etc., are known as determinatives, and were the Sumerian signs of the terms in question, added as a guide for the reader. Proper names continued to be usually written in purely logographic fashion. The earliest known Sumerian king whose name appears on contemporary cuneiform tablets is in Meb-Arajazi of Kish. Surviving records only very gradually become less fragmentary and more complete for the following reigns, but by the end of the pre-Sargonic period, it had become standard practice for each major city-state to date documents by year names commemorating the exploits of its Lugal. From about 2900 BCE, many pictographs began to lose their original function, and a given sign could have various meanings depending on context. The sign inventory was reduced from some 1,500 signs to some 600 signs, and writing became increasingly phonological. Determinative signs were reintroduced to avoid ambiguity. Cuneiform writing proper thus arises from the more primitive system of pictographs at about that time. Archaic cuneiform. In the mid-3rd millennium BCE, writing direction was changed to left to right in horizontal rows, and a new wedge-tipped stylus was used which was pushed into the clay. producing wedge-shaped signs. These two developments made writing quicker and easier. By adjusting the relative position of the tablet to the stylus, the writer could use a single tool to make a variety of impressions. Cuneiform tablets could be fired in kilns to provide a permanent record, or they could be recycled if permanence was not needed. Many of the clay tablets found by archaeologists were preserved because they were fired when attacking armies burned the building in which they were kept. The script was also widely used on commemorative stelae and carved reliefs to record the achievements of the ruler in whose honor the monument had been erected. The spoken language consisted of many similar sounds, and in the beginning similar-sounding words such as life, tail, and arrow, t, were described in writing by the same symbol. After the Semites conquered southern Mesopotamia, some signs gradually changed from being pictograms to syllabograms, most likely to make things clearer in writing. In that way, the sign for the word arrow would become the sign for the sound t. If the sound represented many different words, the words would all have different signs. For instance, the syllable gu had 14 different symbols. When the words had similar meaning but very different sounds, they were written with the same symbol. For instance, tooth zu, mouth ka, and voice gu were all written with the symbol for voice. To be more accurate, they started adding two signs or combined two signs to define the meaning. They used either geometrical patterns or another cuneiform sign. As time went by, the cuneiform got very complex and the distinction between a pictogram and syllabogram became vague. Several symbols had too many meanings to permit clarity. Therefore, symbols were put together to indicate both the sound and the meaning of compound. The word raven, UGA, had the same logogram as the word soap, Naga, name of a city, ERESH, and the patron goddess of Erish, NISABA. Two phonetic complements were used to define the word U in front of the symbol and gu behind. Finally, the symbol for bird, MUSHEN, was added to ensure proper interpretation. The written part of the Sumerian language was used as a learned written language until the 1st century CE. The spoken language died out around the 18th century BCE. Akkadian cuneiform. The archaic cuneiform script was adopted by the Akkadians from c. 2500 BCE, and by 2000 BCE, had evolved into Old Assyrian cuneiform, with many modifications to Sumerian orthography. The Semitic equivalents for many signs became distorted or abbreviated to form new, phonetic values. Because the syllabic nature of the script as refined by the Sumerians was unintuitive to Semitic speakers. At this stage, the former pictograms were reduced to a high level of abstraction, and were composed of only 5 basic wedge shapes: horizontal, vertical, 2 diagonals, and the wing helican impressed vertically by the tip of the stylus. The signs exemplary of these basic wedges are as horizontal, dis, vertical, GE23, dis tenu, downward diagonal, GE22, upward diagonal, U. The wing helican. Except for the wing helican, which has no tail, the length of the wedge's tails could vary as required for sign composition. Signs tilted by about 45 degrees are called tenu in Akkadian, thus dis is a vertical wedge and dis tenu a diagonal one. If a sign is modified with additional wedges, this is called gunu or gunification. If signs are cross-hatched with additional wing helican, they are called sesig. If signs are modified by the removal of a wedge or wedges, they are called natilu. Typical signs have usually in the range of about 5 to 10 wedges. While complex ligatures can consist of 20 or more, the ligature Kaksgur 7 consists of 31 strokes. Most later adaptations of Sumerian cuneiform preserved at least some aspects of the Sumerian script. Written Akkadian included phonetic symbols from the Sumerian syllabary, together with logograms that were read as whole words. Many signs in the script were polyvalent, having both a syllabic and logographic meaning. The complexity of the system bears a resemblance to Old Japanese, written in a Chinese-derived script, where some of these sinograms were used as logograms, and others as phonetic characters. Assyrian cuneiform. This mixed method of writing continued through the end of the Babylonian and Assyrian empires. Although there were periods when purism was in fashion and there was a more marked tendency to spell out the words laboriously, in preference to using signs with a phonetic complement. Yet even in those days, the Babylonian syllabary remained a mixture of logographic and phonemic writing. Hittite cuneiform is an adaptation of the Old Assyrian cuneiform of c. 1800 BCE to the Hittite language. When the cuneiform script was adapted to writing Hittite, a layer of Akkadian logographic speakings was added to the script. Thus the pronunciations of many Hittite words which were conventionally written by logograms are now unknown. In the Iron Age, Assyrian cuneiform was further simplified. From the 6th century, the Assyrian language was marginalized by Aramaic, written in the Aramean alphabet. But Neo-Assyrian cuneiform remained in use in literary tradition well into Parthian times. The last known cuneiform inscription, an astronomical text, was written in 75 CE. Derived scripts. The complexity of the system prompted the development of a number of simplified versions of the script. Old Persian was written in a subset of simplified cuneiform characters known today as Old Persian cuneiform. It formed a semi-alphabetic syllabary, using far fewer wedge strokes than Assyrian used, together with a handful of logograms for frequently occurring words like God and King. The Ugaritic language was written using the Ugaritic alphabet, a standard Semitic-style alphabet written using the cuneiform method. Decipherment. For centuries, travelers to Persepolis, in modern-day Iran, had noticed carved cuneiform inscriptions and were intrigued. Attempts at deciphering these Old Persian writings date back to Arabo-Persian historians of the medieval Islamic world, though these early attempts at decipherment were largely unsuccessful. In the 15th century, the Venetian Barbaro explored ancient ruins in the Middle East and came back with news of a very odd writing he had found carved on the stones in the temples of Shiraz and on many clay tablets. In 1625, the Roman traveller Pietro della Valle, coming back from Mesopotamia and Persia, brought back a tablet written with cuneiform glyphs he had found in Ur, and also the copy of 5 characters he had seen in Persepolis. Della Valle understood that the writing had to be read from left to right, following the direction of wedges, but did not attempt to decipher the scripts. Englishman Sir Thomas Herbert, in the 1634 edition of his travel book A Relation of Some Years' Travail, reported seeing at Persepolis carved on the wall a dozen lines of strange characters, consisting of figures, obelisk, triangular, and pyramidal, and thought they resembled Greek. In the 1664 edition he reproduced some and thought they were legible and intelligible, and therefore decipherable. He also guessed, correctly, that they represented not letters or hieroglyphics but words and syllables, and were to be read from left to right. Herbert is rarely mentioned in standard histories of the decipherment of cuneiform. Carsten Niebuhr brought the first reasonably complete and accurate copies of the inscriptions at Persepolis to Europe. Bishop Friedrich Munter of Copenhagen discovered that the words in the Persian inscriptions were divided from one another by an oblique wedge, that the monuments must belong to the age of Cyrus and his successors. One word, which occurs without any variation towards the beginning of each inscription, he correctly inferred to signify king. By 1802 Georg Friedrich Grotefend had determined that 2 kings' names mentioned were Darius and Xerxes, and had been able to assign correct alphabetic values to the cuneiform characters which composed the 2 names. Although Grotefend's memoir was presented to the Göttingen Academy on September 4, 1802, The Academy refused to publish it. It was subsequently published in Hearne's work in 1815, but was overlooked by most researchers at the time. In 1836, the eminent French scholar Eugène Burnouf discovered that the first of the inscriptions published by Niebuhr contained a list of the satrapies of Darius. With this clue in his hand, he identified and published an alphabet of 30 letters, most of which he had correctly deciphered. A month earlier, a friend and pupil of Burnouf's, Professor Christian Lassen of Bonn, had also published his own work on the Old Persian cuneiform inscriptions of Persepolis. He and Burnouf had been in frequent correspondence, and his claim to have independently detected the names of the satrapies, and thereby to have fixed the values of the Persian characters, was consequently fiercely attacked. According to Sayce, whatever his obligations to Burnouf may have been, Lassen's contributions to the decipherment of the inscriptions were numerous and important. He succeeded in fixing the true values of nearly all the letters in the Persian alphabet, in translating the texts, and in proving that the language of them was not Zend, but stood to both Zend and Sanskrit in the relation of a sister. Sassai. Meanwhile, in 1835, Henry Rawlinson, a British East India Company army officer, visited the Behistun inscriptions in Persia. Carved in the reign of King Darius of Persia, they consisted of identical texts in the three official languages of the empire: Old Persian, Babylonian, and Elamite. The Behistun inscription was to the decipherment of cuneiform what the Rosetta Stone was to the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphs. Rawlinson correctly deduced that the Old Persian was a phonetic script, and he successfully deciphered it. In 1837 he finished his copy of the Behistun inscription, and sent a translation of its opening paragraphs to the Royal Asiatic Society. Before his article could be published, however, the works of Lassen and Burnouf reached him, necessitating a revision of his article and the postponement of its publication. Then came other causes of delay. In 1847 the first part of the Rawlinson's memoir was published, the second part did not appear until 1849. The task of deciphering the Persian cuneiform texts was virtually accomplished. After translating the Persian, Rawlinson and, working independently of him, the Irish Assyriologist Edward Hincks, began to decipher the others. They were greatly helped by Paul Emile Botter's discovery of the city of Nineveh in 1842. Among the treasures uncovered by Botter were the remains of the Great Library of Ashurbanipal, a royal archive containing tens of thousands of baked clay tablets covered with cuneiform inscriptions. By 1851, Hincks and Rawlinson could read 200 Babylonian signs. They were soon joined by two other decipherers, young German-born scholar Julius Oppert, and versatile British Orientalist William Henry Fox Talbot. In 1857 the four men met in London and took part in a famous experiment to test the accuracy of their decipherments. Edwin Norris, the secretary of the Royal Asiatic Society, gave each of them a copy of a recently discovered inscription from the reign of the Assyrian Emperor Tiglath-Pileser I. A jury of experts was impaneled to examine the resulting translations and assess their accuracy. In all essential points the translations produced by the four scholars were found to be in close agreement with one another. There were of course some slight discrepancies. The inexperienced Talbot had made a number of mistakes, and Oppert's translation contained a few doubtful passages which the jury politely ascribed to his unfamiliarity with the English language. But Hincks and Rawlinson's versions corresponded remarkably closely in many respects. The jury declared itself satisfied, and the decipherment of Akkadian cuneiform was adjudged a fait accompli. Proper names. In the early days of cuneiform decipherment, the reading of proper names presented the greatest difficulties. However, there is now a better understanding of the principles behind the formation and the pronunciation of the thousands of names found in historical records, business documents, votive inscriptions, literary productions, and legal documents. The primary challenge was posed by the characteristic use of Old Sumerian non-phonetic logograms in other languages that had different pronunciations for the same symbols. Until the exact phonetic reading of many names was determined through parallel passages or explanatory lists, scholars remained in doubt, or had recourse to conjectural or provisional readings. Fortunately, in many cases, there are variant readings, the same name being written phonetically in one instance, and logographically in another.